arose in the dust. Harmony Gulch was neither harmonious nor much of a gulch. It was a flat expanse of arid land dotted with rickety buildings that looked ready to be scattered like dice by a stiff breeze. Dusty rose grimaced, the pervasive grit already a film on her teeth. The stagecoach groaned to a halt, nearly launching her into the opposite seat. Harmony Gulch. End of the line, the driver barked, his voice as parched as the landscape. She gathered her few possessions, a worn valise containing her best dress, some practical attire, and a photo of her deceased parents. The picture felt weighty, a stark reminder of what she'd left behind and what she hoped to gain from this gamble. Stepping down, the reddish-brown dust instantly claimed her new boots. The farm Mr. Abernathy had so eloquently portrayed existed only in his letters, apparently. A dilapidated farmhouse slumped like a weary traveler, its paint flaking off in brittle patches. The barn was a gaunt skeleton of aged wood, more likely to collapse than shelter livestock. Fences canted at impossible angles, and the fields were a desolate patchwork of weeds and parched soil. The bright flame of hope, ignited on her westward journey, now threatened to gut her out. She hauled her suitcase toward the house, its wheels protesting on the uneven ground. The front door stood slightly ajar, emitting an ominous creak in the breeze. With a hesitant shove, she pushed it open, revealing a gloomy interior thick with the stagnant air of disuse and the sharp scent of rodent leavings. Cobwebs hung like ghostly tapestries, and dust motes pirouetted in the thin sunbeams slicing through begrimed windows. "Well," she murmured, forcing a brave smile. "At least I have solitude." After a quick tour, confirming the house's uninhabitable condition, Dusty decided to explore the barn. Perhaps some saving grace lurked within its walls. She plowed through the overgrown weeds, the silence broken only by the forlorn squeal of the weather vane atop the barn. The barn door was even more decrepit than the house, hanging precariously by a single hinge. With considerable effort, she pried it open just enough to squeeze inside. The interior was dim and redolent of dry hay mixed with a strange, vaguely animalistic scent. Her eyes struggled to adjust to the gloom, and that's when she spotted him. Splayed out on a mound of hay in the furthest corner was a man. A young man, judging by the smooth planes of his exposed cheek. He was sound asleep, his chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm. He wore faded denim jeans and a worn blue shirt, his dark hair tousled across his forehead. A wide-brimmed hat lay discarded beside him, partially obscuring his features. Dusty froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. This detail hadn't made it into Mr. Abernathy's correspondence, not even in the small print. She cleared her throat, but the vastness of the barn swallowed the sound. Taking a cautious step forward, the dry hay crunched softly under her boots. "Excuse me," she ventured, her voice barely audible. "Excuse me, sir." He didn't stir. Dusty took another step, her anxiety escalating with each footfall. This was her barn, her farm, and this intruder was sleeping in it. "Sir," she said, her voice gaining volume, edged with nascent irritation. "You're trespassing." The man groaned softly and shifted, but remained asleep. Exasperated, Dusty approached the hay pile and prodded him with her toe. A gentle nudge, but firm enough to rouse him. His eyes flickered open, dark brown and momentarily lost. He blinked, shielding his eyes with a hand. He sat up abruptly, sending a small dust storm swirling around him. "Whoa," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "What time is it?" He looked up at Dusty, his expression morphing from confusion to surprise, then something akin to amusement. A slow, easy grin spread across his face, revealing a single dimple in his left cheek. Dusty felt a warmth creep into her face despite her annoyance. "I believe that's my question," she retorted, attempting a stern tone. "This is my property. What are you doing slumbering in my barn?" He stretched, his muscles flexing beneath the fabric of his shirt, then casually reached for his hat, settling it on his head at a rakish angle. "Your property?" he drawled, his voice deep and resonant. "Last I knew, This was Abernathy's spread. It was Abernathy's, Dusty corrected, lifting her chin. I'm Miss Rose. Dusty Rose. Mr. Abernathy sold me this farm. He fixed her with a long, unnerving stare. Then he let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned, he said, a glint of mischief in his eyes. Abernathy finally landed himself a bride. Dusty's flush deepened. I'm not his bride, she snapped. I merely purchased the farm from him. He rose to his feet, towering over her. He was taller and broader than she'd realized, his shoulders straining the seams of his worn denim shirt. So you did, he acknowledged, his eyes still assessing her. Well, Miss Rose, seems I owe you an apology. Didn't expect anyone to actually show up. Show up where? Dusty pressed, her patience wearing thin. And who are you? He hesitated, as if weighing his words. Name's Jed, he said finally. Jedediah Strong. And as for where I was just passing through, you could say. His explanation felt flimsy, lacking conviction. Dusty didn't believe him for a moment, but she was too weary, too overwhelmed to pursue it. Well, Jedediah Strong, she stated, her voice tinged with fatigue. You'll have to find somewhere else to pass through. This barn is mine now. The millionaire in the hay. Dusty Rose crossed her arms, a film of barnyard grime clinging to her skin. Jedediah, what brings you here? She demanded, her tone edgier than intended. Faint light, lancing through chinks in the weathered wood, backlit the lazy dance of airborne dust. He straightened, dislodging a wisp of sun-bleached hair from his brow. Said it before, just passing through. Passing through a collapsing barn in the back of beyond. She swept a hand, encompassing the dilapidated farm, the physical embodiment of her foundering aspirations. Jedediah's jaw hardened. Suits me fine. His gaze skirted hers, settling on a fraying thread of his denim jacket. The silence hung heavy, thick with the weight of unasked questions, a low-voltage tension that raised gooseflesh on Dusty's arms. You know, she began, her voice a deliberate murmur, there's been talk about Mr. Henderson's vanishing act. Jedediah's head shot up. Vanished. Gone. Clean. Abandoned his herd, his ranch, everything. She watched him, dissecting his reaction, searching for a telltale sign. Some whisper he eloped with a younger woman. Others, well, they suspect foul play. He raked a hand through his hair, disrupting its order. Wouldn't know a thing about it. Dusty's eyes narrowed, unconvinced. Some elusive emotion flickered behind his blue eyes, something she couldn't name. Look, whatever your story is, Jedediah Strong, this is my land now. I need to make it work. I need to get it back on its feet. Think I'm stopping you? He countered, rising abruptly, his height now a tangible presence in the confined space. I think you're hindering it, she shot back, refusing to yield ground. I need to know I can trust you. Meanwhile, back in Harmony Gulch, Marty May held court at the general store, her pronouncements echoing amidst the creak of floorboards and the rattle of tin cans. A woman, you say? She cackled, eyes gleaming with mischief. All the way from, where was it? Some eastern place? And finds a young whippersnapper snoozing in her barn. That's the scuttlebutt, Marty May, replied Earl, the storekeeper, polishing the counter. Lou spotted her heading to the Henderson place yesterday. Looked determined, he said. Determined to do what? Boot out the bum. Marty May leaned in, her voice a sibilant whisper. Or maybe she's in league with him. Maybe they ran Henderson off together. A murmur rippled through the cluster around the pot-bellied stove. Mr. Henderson's disappearance still lingered, and the arrival of the stranger and the drifter had set tongues wagging at warp speed. Now, Marty May, Earl chided, don't go spreading tales. We don't know the facts. Just speculating, she said, all feigned innocence, but her eyes sparkled. It's peculiar, though, ain't it? A mail-order bride and a runaway, arriving at the same juncture. Seems like kismet, if you ask me. Back at the barn, Dusty's shoulders slumped with the weight of her predicament. The farm was a shambles, the townsfolk were suspicious, and she had a charming, potentially dishonest, young man camping in her barn. Fine, she conceded, fatigue lacing her voice. Here's the proposition. You can stay a week. You owe me clean this place up. Earn your keep. Then she pointed a finger. You're gone. No debate. Jedediah hesitated, his expression an enigma. Then a slow, deliberate smile curved his lips. A week, huh? I can manage that. Dusty regarded him with suspicion. And no funny business. I mean it, Jedediah. I'm not as green as I look. Wouldn't dream of it, he replied, amusement dancing in his eyes. Dusty remained unconvinced. As she turned from the barn, the sinking sun painting long shadows across the fields, she couldn't shake the sensation that she'd struck a bargain with the devil himself. Or at the very least, a maddeningly attractive, entirely too complicated devil-may-care version. Hammer and heart. The rising sun painted the barn in hues of apricot and rose, the light catching the dust motes dancing in the air as Jedediah ambled in. He carried a toolbox that looked older than Dusty, its latch secured with a piece of worn leather. "Mornin', Dusty," he said, his voice raspy with sleep. "Figured I'd make myself useful." He gestured towards the gaping hole in the barn's west wall, where Rod had claimed a generous section of the siding. "That's a draft that could freeze a body solid come winter." Dusty, already nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, eyed him skeptically. She'd expected him to sleep in, maybe even try to skip out altogether. "You know how to fix that?" Jedediah grinned, a flash of white against his shadowed face. "Ma always said I was better with my hands and my head. Though don't tell anyone I admitted that." He set the toolbox down with a thud and ran a hand along the weathered wood. "Got any spare lumber?" Dusty pointed to a stack of reclaimed planks leaning against the far wall. "Enough to patch it, I reckon. And nails in the shed." For the next few hours, the only sounds were the rhythmic clang of Jedediah's hammer, the rasp of the saw, and the occasional creak of the barn settling. Dusty found herself drawn into the work, fetching tools, holding planks steady, and occasionally offering advice that Jedediah, surprisingly, seemed to heed. He worked with a quiet competence that belied his drifter appearance. His movements were economical, efficient, born of practice, not theory. The sweat glistened on his brow, darkening the dust clinging to his eyelashes. Dusty found herself watching him more than she watched the repair itself. "So," she said, breaking the comfortable silence as she handed him a handful of nails. "Where'd you learn all this?" He paused, hammering a nail home with a decisive blow. "Grew up on a ranch back east. Always something breaking, always something needing fixin'." He didn't elaborate, and Dusty sensed a reluctance in his tone. "Ranching's hard work," she offered, filling the silence. "Especially these days." "Tell me about it," he muttered, then looked up, a disarming smile on his face. "But you seem to be managing all right." Dusty snorted. "Managing is a generous word. I am surviving. Barely." She leaned against a post, the sun warm on her face. "Used to be my pa and me against the world. Now it's just me." Jedediah stopped working, his gaze meeting hers. "Lost him, did you?" Dusty nodded, the memory still sharp. "Last spring. Pneumonia. Took him quick." "Sorry to hear that," he said softly, and for the first time, Dusty saw genuine sympathy in his eyes, not pity, but a shared understanding of loss. They worked in silence for a while longer, the shared grief creating a fragile bond between them. As the sun climbed higher, Dusty brought out a pitcher of iced tea and 2 chipped mugs. They sat in the shade of the barn, the air thick with the scent of wood and hay. "So," Jedediah said, taking a long swig of tea, "what about Mr. Henderson?" Dusty stiffened. "What about him?" "Well, folks in town seem to think his disappearing act is a bit peculiar." He raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "And you showing up right around the same time, are you saying you think I had something to do with it?" Dusty's voice was sharper than she intended. Jedediah held up his hands in mock surrender. "Whoa there, Dusty Rose. Just repeating what I heard. Though, between you and me, Henderson always struck me as the kind of fella who'd skip town owing more than he could pay." Dusty considered this. It wasn't an unreasonable theory. Henderson had been struggling for years, always one bad harvest away from bankruptcy. "Maybe," she conceded, "but that doesn't explain why he left everything behind." Jedediah shrugged. Maybe he got tired of it all. Maybe he just wanted a fresh start. He looked out at the fields, a wistful expression on his face. Dusty studied him, tried to decipher the meaning behind his words. Was he talking about Henderson? Or himself? "What about you, Jedediah?" she asked, the question hanging in the air. "What do you want?" He turned back to her, his eyes glinting in the sunlight. "What makes you think I know?" He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. "Maybe I'm just looking for a place to belong." The touch was light, fleeting, but it sent a jolt of electricity through Dusty. She hadn't been touched like that in longer than she cared to remember. She caught her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "Well, Jedediah," she managed to say, her voice a little shaky, "this farm ain't much, but it's honest work. And right now, it needs all the help it can get." She stood up abruptly, needing to break the spell. "Besides, that wall ain't gonna fix itself." The gilded cage. Dusty scrubbed at the countertop, the scent of lye soap stinging her nostrils. Jedediah's confession still hung in the air, thick and suffocating like the summer humidity. He was promised. To Prudence Sterling. The realization felt like a punch to the gut. "Why didn't you say anything?" she finally managed, her voice tight. Jedediah leaned against the doorframe, his usually bright eyes clouded with a frustration she suddenly understood. "Would it have mattered?" "Of course it would have mattered. I wouldn't have." She trailed off, unable to articulate what she wouldn't have done. Wouldn't have felt this strange pull, this hope. He pushed off the doorframe and walked towards her, stopping just close enough to make her breath catch. "It's not what I want, Dusty. It's what's expected." He ran a hand through his dark hair, dislodging a speck of sawdust. "The Sterling fortune, the strong legacy, it's all tied together. Always has been." Dusty turned back to the counter, fiercely scrubbing a spot that didn't exist. "So, you're just going to go through with it? Marry someone you don't love? Is that what you think?" Jedediah's voice was low, almost a whisper. He stepped closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "That I don't love anyone." Before she could respond, a high-pitched, saccharine voice sliced through the air. "Jedediah? Jedediah, darling, are you here?" Dusty froze, her hand gripping the edge of the counter. "Prudence Sterling." Jedediah swore under his breath. "Speak of the devil." He turned towards the door, his expression hardening. "What are you doing here, Prudence?" Prudence glided into the kitchen, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair shimmering under the light. She wore a dress that probably cost more than Dusty's entire farm was worth, and her lips were painted a vibrant, artificial red. Her eyes, however, were anything but welcoming as they landed on Dusty. "Mother sent me to find you," she said, her voice dripping with honeyed disdain. "She was worried sick when you didn't come home last night. Imagine our surprise when we learned you were roughing it out here." She let her gaze linger on Dusty, taking in her worn dress and calloused hands. "I was helping Dusty with her barn," Jedediah said, his jaw tight. Prudence's painted eyebrows arched. "Helping? How charming." She took a step closer to Jedediah, looping her arm through his. "Come, darling. Mother has planned a luncheon. All the important people will be there, eager to congratulate us." Jedediah hesitated, his eyes flicking towards Dusty. She forced herself to meet his gaze, willing him to stay, to say something, anything. But he didn't. He allowed Prudence to steer him towards a door. "It was nice to see you, Dusty," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth it had held just moments before. Prudence's smile was sharp and victorious as she led Jedediah away. "Indeed. Goodbye, Miss Rose." Dusty watched them go, the silence in the kitchen deafening. She felt a strange mix of anger, disappointment, and relief. This gilded cage of obligation and expectation, it wasn't her world. She had her farm, her independence, even if it was a hard-won, solitary existence. Later that afternoon, while mending fences, Martha Perkins stopped by with a basket of freshly baked bread. "Heard tell Prudence Sterling found Jedediah out here," she said, her eyes twinkling with gossip. "Said he was practically living in your barn." Dusty sighed. It had begun. "Said you were mighty friendly with him, considering he's a betrothed man. Martha continued, seemingly oblivious to Dusty's lack of enthusiasm. Some folks are saying you're trying to steal him away. Dusty's grip tightened on the fence post. That's ridiculous, Martha. He was just helping me with the barn. Martha shrugged, her eyes still dancing. That's not what Prudence is saying. She seems mighty upset. Says you're after his money and position. Thinks you're trying to lure him in. The gears were turning. She could feel them. Prudence was planting seeds of doubt, painting Dusty as a scheming gold digger. It was a classic tactic, and it was working. Well, you tell Prudence that I have no interest in her fiancé or his money, Dusty said, her voice firm. I just want to be left alone to run my farm. Martha chuckled. I'll tell her, dear, but I wouldn't hold my breath. Prudence Sterling doesn't take kindly to competition. Whispers in the wind. The wind, thick with pine and petrichor, now bore something darker, rumors. These slanders snaked through Harmony Gulch, poisoning the air with mistrust, each encounter on Main Street a gauntlet. Marty May, once a bubbling brook of gossip, offered a clamped-down smile and a curt greeting before vanishing into the mercantile behind a barricade of provisions. Even little Billy, her shadow at the pie social, now shied away, clutching his mother's skirt as they bypassed Dusty's stand of the market. Prudence's campaign was gaining traction. Dusty battled the sting of isolation by immersing herself in labor. The resounding crack of the axe, the yielding earth beneath her fingers as she bedded the last tomato seedlings, the quiet triumph of a mended fence. These were her anchors, reminders of her purpose in Harmony Gulch. Yet, even the farm felt tainted. The solitude, formerly solace, now pressed in like walls. She longed for casual banter, exchanged smiles, the nascent sense of belonging she'd been nurturing. Now, she was an outcast, met with suspicion and thinly veiled animosity. One dusk, Jedediah found her on the porch swing, watching the twilight bleed across the fields. He carried mugs, the robust scent of dark roast dispelling the evening chill. Tough one, he inquired, offering a mug. Dusty sipped, the warmth easing the cold in her hands. The rumors are reaching a crescendo, she admitted, her voice a breath. Jedediah settled beside her, the swing protesting softly. No empty reassurances, no dismisses. Just quiet companionship against the encroaching night. Prudence has been working overtime, she added, needing to fill the void. I overheard Mrs. Henderson at the post office something about a mail-order bride and a mercenary heart. Jedediah cursed under his breath, a low rumble that startled Dusty. She oversteps. She believes she's defending her territory, Dusty murmured, almost to herself. And what does she claim as hers? Jedediah's tone held a sharp edge Dusty hadn't detected before. He fixed his gaze on the horizon, his jaw clenched tight. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the drone of crickets and the distant cry of a coyote. Dusty found solace in Jedediah's mere presence. He understood, perhaps more acutely than anyone, the stifling weight of expectation. Thank you for the coffee, she said, finally disrupting the quiet. And for being here. Anytime, he replied, his expression softening. Dusty, about Prudence. He hesitated, searching for the right words like hidden gems. Dusty waited, her pulse quickening. This arrangement, it isn't my desire, he finally confessed, his voice subdued and genuine. But it's tangled. Dusty nodded, understanding more than he suspected. She knew the burden of familial duty, the pull of conformity, the dread of letting loved ones down. I should leave, Jedediah said, rising suddenly. Prudence expects me. He turned, then paused, his hand gripping the porch railing. Don't let her slander erode you, Dusty. You possess a strength greater than that. He vanished into the gloom, leaving Dusty alone with her thoughts. The wind quickened, swirling around her, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, and the faint, insidious whispers of Harmony Gulch. But tonight, they held a lessened power, a blunted edge. Because for the first time in a long while, Dusty Rose felt a flicker of connection. The echo of Jedediah's affirmation resonated within her, a small ember of defiance against the gathering shadows. She would not be bullied. She would not be silenced. She would weather this tempest, and she would rebuild her existence, one seed, one fence post, one hushed word at a time. Storm clouds gathering. The wind tasted like rain. Dusty could feel in the grit between her teeth a metallic tang that spoke of distant lightning. The sky, normally a cheerful blue, was bruised purple, roiling with an energy that made the hair on her arms stand on end. Mrs. Gable from the general store had been the first to mention it, her voice tight with worry as she rung up Dusty's meager grocery bill. "Big one coming, Dusty. Heard it on the radio. Get yourself battened down." Dusty had tried to dismiss the anxiety creeping up her spine. Storms were a fact of life in the country. But as the day wore on, the feeling intensified. The cows were restless, huddled together in the lower pasture, their low moans carrying on the rising wind. Even the chickens, usually scattered across the yard, were crammed into the coop, pecking nervously at each other. She'd spent the afternoon securing anything that could be blown away: tools, loose boards, the watering trough. The old barn, already leaning precariously, worried her the most. She reinforced the doors with extra planks, praying the whole structure wouldn't collapse under the force of the wind. As dusk approached, the first fat raindrops began to fall, splattering against the dry earth with a sound like angry whispers. Dusty stood on the porch, watching the storm gather strength, when Jedediah's familiar silhouette appeared at the end of the lane, riding his chestnut mare hard. He dismounted, his face grim. "Dusty, you need to get to higher ground. The creek's already rising fast." Mayor Sterling's issuing a mandatory evacuation order for the lower fields. Dusty crossed her arms, a stubborn set to her jaw. "Evacuate? And leave everything I've worked for to be washed away?" "It's not safe here," Jedediah insisted, his voice laced with urgency. "This isn't just a normal storm, Dusty. This is different. The old-timers are saying it's the worst they've seen in decades." He gestured toward the roiling sky. "Look at that. You can't fight that. And where am I supposed to go?" Dusty challenged. "Back to that dusty apartment in Chicago? I am staying." Jedediah sighed, running a hand through his already windswept hair. "Stubborn as a mule," he muttered. Then, his expression softened. "All right, then at least let me help you move the livestock. We can get them up to Miller's pasture. It's on higher ground, and the barn there is solid." Working together, they herded the cows, coaxed the chickens back into their makeshift carriers, and even managed to convince the reluctant pigs to follow them towards the Miller farm. The rain was coming down in sheets now, blurring the landscape and turning the dirt road into a muddy river. As they reached the crest of the hill overlooking Harmony Gulch, Dusty could see the town below, a cluster of lights battling against the encroaching darkness. Even from this distance, she could hear the wail of the town's emergency siren, a mournful sound that echoed through the valley. Jedediah pointed towards the town square. "The community hall is open as a shelter. I need to go down there, make sure everyone gets to safety." His gaze met hers, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Promise me you'll stay here, Dusty. It's the safest place." She hesitated, her stubbornness warring with a growing sense of unease. The wind howled around them, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. Finally, she nodded. "I promise." Jedediah squeezed her hand, his touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary. Then he mounted his mare and turned back towards the town, disappearing into the rain-swept darkness. Dusty watched him go, a knot of worry tightening in her stomach. She didn't trust him, not completely. But as the storm raged around her, she couldn't deny the relief she felt knowing he was out there, helping others. Below, in Harmony Gulch, Mayor Sterling stood on the steps of the community hall, barking orders into a megaphone, his voice barely audible above the wind. Prudence clung to his arm, her face pale with fear. Jedediah approached them, his face grim. "Father, we need to get everyone inside," Prudence's dad yelled. "The creek's about to overflow." "People are still arriving," Mayor Sterling replied, gesturing impatiently. "And some are refusing to leave their homes. Stubborn fools." He glared in the general direction of Dusty's farm. They'll regret it. Jedediah ignored the mayor's bluster. I'm going to check the lower streets. Make sure everyone's evacuated, he said, his voice firm. Mayor Sterling scoffed. Waste of time. Let them drown. Less mouths to feed. Jedediah's jaw tightened. With all due respect, sir, that's not an option. He turned and strode off into the storm, his silhouette disappearing into the swirling rain and wind. The mayor watched him go, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. He's too eager, he muttered to Prudence. Too eager to play the hero, the eye of the storm. The wind howled like a banshee, clawing at the farmhouse. Rain lashed against the windows, blurring the already fading light. Dusty, soaked to the bone despite her oilskins, wrestled the last chicken into the makeshift coop Jedediah had helped her construct. He reappeared, his face grim, his own coat plastered to his broad shoulders. The creek's rising fast, he shouted over the din. We need to get to higher ground. The barn loft should be dry. Dusty hesitated. Leaving the farmhouse, even for the barn, felt like surrendering to the storm. But Jedediah was right. The water was already lapping at the porch steps. All right, she conceded, grabbing a lantern. Let's go. The trek to the barn was a treacherous dance against the elements. The wind threatened to rip the lantern from her grasp, and the ground was slick with mud. They stumbled more than walked, Jedediah's strong arm a constant support. Inside the barn, the air was thick with the scent of hay and damp wood. The loft, accessible by a rickety ladder, offered a small haven from the storm's fury. They huddled together, the single lantern casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The wind still howled outside, rattling the barn doors, but here, in the relative shelter of the loft, they could almost hear each other think. Thanks, Jedediah, Dusty said, her voice barely above a whisper, for helping with the animals. He shrugged, his gaze fixed on the storm raging outside. Couldn't let them drown. Or you. An awkward silence descended, punctuated only by the storm's relentless roar. Dusty found herself staring at him, really looking at him for the first time. The flickering light illuminated the lines etched around his eyes, the weariness in his face. He looked vulnerable. Why are you really here, Jedediah? She asked softly, the question hanging in the air. You didn't have to help me. He turned to her, his blue eyes searching hers. Maybe, he said slowly, I wanted to. He ran a hand through his wet hair, leaving it sticking up in unruly spikes. Maybe I'm tired of doing what everyone expects me to do. Dusty's heart skipped a beat. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a yearning that mirrored her own. The storm seemed to fade into the background as their gazes locked. It felt like the entire world had narrowed to this small space, this shared moment of vulnerability. He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek. Dusty. A deafening crack of thunder split the air, jolting them both. The barn shuddered, and the lantern flickered precariously. The moment was broken. Jedediah pulled his hand back, a sheepish look on his face. We should probably try to get some sleep, he said, his voice strained. It's going to be a long night. Dusty nodded, her cheeks flushed. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that her feelings for Jedediah were growing, and that they were reciprocated. But what did that mean, with Prudence waiting for him back in town? Meanwhile, in the Sterling mansion, Prudence paced before the fireplace, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. The storm was her captive audience, the roaring wind a perfect soundtrack to her simmering rage. She had heard about Jedediah's heroic efforts to help Dusty, of course. News traveled fast in Harmony Gulch, especially the kind she didn't want to hear. That farm woman, she hissed, clenching her fists. She thinks she can just waltz in here and steal everything I've worked for. Her mother, a woman whose face was as smooth and unreadable as polished granite, sat calmly knitting by the fire. Patience, Prudence, she said, without looking up. Storms always pass, and they often leave a trail of opportunities. Prudence stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing. Opportunities? Indeed, her mother replied, finally meeting her gaze. This storm has likely damaged Dusty's farm, ruined her crops, perhaps even destroyed some of her buildings. And Jedediah, noble as he is, will undoubtedly rush to her aid. Again, she paused, letting her words sink in. This is your chance, Prudence, to show the town, and Jedediah, where his loyalties should truly lie, and to discredit Miss Rose in the process. A slow smile spread across Prudence's face. I think, she said, her voice dripping with malice, I have a plan. She envisioned Dusty's ruined fields, her shattered dreams, and Jedediah finally seeing the truth. The storm, she decided, was working in her favor after all. Truth and thunder. The wind, still a banshee wail, ripped at the edges of the hastily boarded-up windows of the Harmony Gulch Community Hall. Inside, a motley collection of townsfolk huddled, their faces lit by the flickering kerosene lamps. Mayor Sterling, his face a mask of grim authority, barked evacuation orders, prioritizing the elderly and families with young children. Prudence stood beside him, her usually immaculate dress rumpled and stained, but her eyes glittering with a strange triumph. Dusty, having managed to secure a ride with Marty May, stood near the back, feeling as exposed as a sapling in a hurricane. Jedediah was nowhere to be seen, and a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. Had the storm driven him back to Sterling Manor? Had their shared moment in the barn meant nothing? Marty May, sensing Dusty's unease, patted her arm with a hand that smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke. Don't you fret, dear. He's probably just seeing to his own family. Bound to be worried about his mama. Dusty forced a smile, but her gaze kept darting towards the entrance. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, Prudence's voice cut through the din. It was high and sharp, carrying easily across the room. I think everyone should know something about our newest resident. All eyes turned to her, including Dusty's. A cold dread washed over her. Prudence continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. It seems Miss Rose neglected to mention a rather important detail about her arrival in Harmony Gulch. She paused for dramatic effect, her gaze fixed on Dusty. She's a mail-order bride. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Marty May's hand tightened on Dusty's arm, her lavender scent suddenly cloying. The whispers started, low and insidious, snaking through the room like the floodwaters threatening to breach the town's defenses. Dusty felt the blood drain from her face. The humiliation was a physical blow, a searing brand on her skin. She had hoped to keep this part of her life private, a secret she could control. Now, it was being used as a weapon against her, wielded by Prudence with cruel precision. Is it true? Mayor Sterling's voice was harsh, his eyes narrowed. Dusty swallowed, her throat dry. Yes, she whispered, the word barely audible above the storm's roar. The whispers intensified, morphing into murmurs of judgment and disapproval. She saw the familiar faces of Harmony Gulch, faces that had shown her tentative kindness, now etched with suspicion and disdain. The general store owner, who had offered her credit, the postman, who had always greeted her with a cheerful wave, all looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and disgust. Before Dusty could formulate a response, Jedediah strode into the community hall, his face etched with a fury she had never seen before. Rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, and his clothes were soaked, but his eyes blazed with an unwavering intensity. He pushed through the crowd, his gaze locked on Prudence. That's enough, Prudence, he said, his voice a low growl that silenced the room. Prudence recoiled, her moment of triumph shattered. Jedediah, what are you doing here? You should be at the manor. He ignored her, turning to Dusty. He took her hand, his touch warm and strong, a lifeline in the sea of condemnation. Dusty rose, he said, his voice clear and resonant. I admire your courage, your resilience, and your spirit. The circumstances of your arrival here are irrelevant. What matters is the woman you are. He turned back to Prudence, his expression hardening. As for you, Prudence, I can no longer abide by this charade. I will not marry you. Our engagement is over. The air crackled with shock. Prudence gasped, her face contorted with rage and disbelief. Mayor Sterling sputtered, his face turning a shade of purple that rivaled the storm clouds gathering outside. Jedediah didn't give them a chance to respond. He kept Dusty's hand firmly in his and led her towards the door, ignoring the stunned silence that followed them. As they stepped out into the raging storm, the wind seemed to carry his words back into the hall, a declaration that echoed louder than the thunder. Harmony found. The silence that crashed down after Jedediah's pronouncement was a tangible thing, heavier even than the relentless downpour still battering Harmony Gulch. Prudence, her features twisted into a grotesque caricature of disbelief and rage, made a strangled noise, but before she could loose another volley of accusations, Jedediah grasped Dusty's hand, his touch surprisingly secure. "We're making an announcement," he declared, his voice resonating with a certainty that seemed to root them to the spot. "Dusty and I were getting married." A wave of astonishment swept through the onlookers. Marty May, perched precariously on an upturned pail, nearly tumbled, her jaw slack. Dusty reciprocated the pressure of Jedediah's hand, a blend of shock and elation singing through her veins. She hadn't anticipated this, not so abruptly, not with such fanfare. Yet, gazing into Jedediah's eyes, she encountered a sureness, a determination that mirrored her own awakening. Marty May finally managed, the word a mere peep. But, Prudence, Jedediah halted her. "Prudence and I were never a true match. This tempest, this entire ordeal has clarified what matters most. And that is Dusty." He pivoted towards Dusty, his expression gentling. Dusty rose. "Will you grant me the profound privilege of becoming my wife?" Dusty's pulse hammered in her ears. Every lingering doubt, every apprehension that had shadowed her since arriving in Harmony Gulch, seemed to dissolve, cleansed by the deluge and Jedediah's steadfast regard. "Yes," she breathed, her voice shaky yet firm. "Yes, Jedediah, I will." A cheer rose from the crowd, tentative at first, then swelling as the initial shock gave way. Even Marty May, after a protracted moment of gaping, joined in, clapping with unexpected gusto. The tension that had held Harmony Gulch hostage for so long finally seemed to break apart, replaced by an undeniable current of hope. The ensuing weeks spun by in a blur. Plans unfurled, arrangements solidified, and the town, eager for redemption, rallied around the engaged couple. Marty May, remarkably, became Dusty's staunchest ally, proffering advice, assistance, and endless cups of herbal tea. Even some of the women who had initially ostracized Dusty now sought her out, offering apologies and heartfelt well wishes. The wedding itself was a modest affair, hosted in the freshly renovated town hall, its timbers still releasing the delicate aroma of new pine. Dusty donned a gown crafted from fabric salvaged from her mother's old trunk, its antique lace whispering tales of a bygone era. Jedediah, dashing in a well-cut suit, awaited her at the altar, his eyes gleaming with an emotion Dusty had never witnessed before. As they exchanged vows, the oppressive storm clouds that had haunted Harmony Gulch seemed to yield, allowing sunlight to flood through the panes, enveloping the couple in a tender, golden embrace. It was a moment of sheer, untainted joy, a testament to the enduring strength of love and forgiveness. Following the vows, Jedediah declared his intention to merge his holdings with Dusty's, forging a single, expansive farm that would provide sustenance and prospects for the entire community. He spoke of novel crops, cutting-edge agricultural methods, and a shared vision for a brighter horizon. The townspeople, galvanized by Jedediah's foresight and Dusty's unwavering resolve, embraced the concept wholeheartedly. They collaborated to mend damaged structures, clear fallen debris, and cultivate fresh seedlings. A sense of common purpose and fellowship permeated the atmosphere, displacing the acrimony and resentment that had festered for so long. Dusty and Jedediah labored in unison, their hands roughened and stained by the soil, their spirits brimming with affection and optimism. They repaired fences, cared for the animals, and sowed row after row of corn, beans, and squash. The farm became a symbol of their bond, an embodiment of their commitment to each other and to Harmony Gulch. As the days lengthened and the sun beat down upon the revitalized fields, Harmony Gulch began its recovery. The scars from the storm lingered, a potent reminder of the tribulations they had surmounted, but they were eclipsed by the lush greenery of the crops, the joyous cries of children gambling in the meadows, and the unwavering affection that entwined Dusty and Jedediah. One evening, as the sun sank beneath the mountains, painting the heavens in vibrant shades of coral and rose, Dusty and Jedediah stood together, hand in hand, surveying their domain. The atmosphere was redolent with the sweet fragrance of wildflowers and the soft chirping of crickets. Harmony rediscovered, Dusty murmured, resting her head on Jedediah's shoulder. He encircled her with his arms, pulling her close. "Indeed, my love," he replied softly. Harmony rediscovered at last. And as they remained there, enveloped in the warm glow of dusk, they understood that their love, like the land they nurtured, would continue to flourish, bestowing prosperity and contentment upon Harmony Gulch for generations to come.